Today's lecture is on gentrification, or what I will refer to as the G word. To get started, there are key points in terms of how to approach this lecture, and the way we will approach it is first find ways to organize your thinking. And to do that, we have to think about the origins of the word, and as we progress in learning about what's in the definition, we have to isolate all the different components and then see how they come together to a big picture. All the different components focus on different aspects of a definition. It could be quite long, and it's just important to know the definition has different components. As we move on with the lecture, we're going to have an exercise where you get to check to see what a calculator says your socioeconomic background is. You get to fill that in. You go to the Pew Research Center. They have it's called the middle class calculator, and that helps us understand where we may fit in this lecture in terms of the gentrification. And then we get into how does it happen, who wins, who loses, and what are some of the debates that are going on in your city. You get to do an exercise at the end of the lecture. You don't have to submit your answers, but it does help to get into an exercise like that to help the material be a little bit more relevant for you. Okay. Organizing your thinking. As I mentioned before, know that there are numerous parts to the definition. And knowing that when you take notes, it will be good to highlight all the different parts or have your own system where you see all the different components to the definition. After that, try to get yourself in a position where you take a stand on the definition and what it is and wrestle with it. You might feel that some parts are good, some parts are bad, all of it's good, all of it's bad, or you may feel that, well, some of it's good and in certain situations it's good, in other situations I don't think it's good. That may happen. That is in part what makes gentrification very controversial for many people. And when you have conversations with others or you read newspaper articles, you watch a video, you will see how different people approach it. Some people have a certain understanding of the term, others have a different understanding of the term, and then they talk to each other having a different definition. And so it could be really complicated. And the lecture here is just to make that evident, but yet have you focus in understanding all the components so you don't get confused. And then that's important to know from the beginning. Okay, so who came up with the term gentrification? When and where? In the middle 60s, a British sociologist and also an urban planner, Ruth came up with the term gentrification. She conducted a study in London, in a certain place in London, and where she made certain observations on how people with more income, middle class type of income, were moving into a neighborhood, remodeling homes, and in this neighborhood is where more working class people used to live. And she started noticing these changes. Okay, and she had a problem with that. She had a problem with that because eventually what happened in her observation in other places around the world when this process begins is the process of gentrification, where you have a gentry, someone with more high income, and typically a homeowner or owner of certain material means. They're more well off than others, and now when they move in, then those that used to live there won't be able to afford the area, or eventually they are displaced, whether they're homeowners or renters. And so we'll get into the more specifics in a bit, but that was her main concern, and she had a problem with that. Click on this link that you see here. Well, let me go back. That you see here, and you get a little background on that context of the time period where she was writing about gentrification when she came up with the term. I have an optional about 15-minute audio of a lecture from Loretta Lees, who is one of the most well-known experts on gentrification, and she gets into a brief history of these observations that Glass made, and then she also starts talking about how the term has evolved today. It's 15 minutes. Unfortunately, that audio doesn't have a transcript. If you need a transcript, then I didn't make the audio format. Don't feel obligated to listen to it. It will be useful if you can and if you are able to, but you don't have to. And here's the paragraph of her write-up. The key thing to know is if we're used to reading concepts or theoretical ideas, oftentimes we have something very succinct, very concise, short sentence of a definition. And typically you'll see that in a psychology class, a sociology class. And the way Glass wrote about this, Glass wrote about this, she didn't just say, well, here's a definition and so forth. It was more written in a paragraph format, and this is what you see here. And I won't read everything that's here, but the point is to see that her focus, as I mentioned earlier, were individuals, people moving into new areas and improving them materially, and then as time goes on, the residencies there, once you sell them or the value is assessed, it'll be a higher value. Okay. And for this, what's key to this is that the whole idea of displacement. As that process begins, there are a lot of other elements that eventually happen. The people who were there of modest means, working class, working poor people, eventually won't be able to be living there any longer. They'll be displaced. Okay. And she also has an issue with that, is that the whole social character, the whole whatever people will say was the social scene there, the cultural vibrancy that was there, etc. You'll hear that type of discussion is. So she also sees that all of that ends up changing. So she's able to observe how change happens. Okay. And one of the key words in there was invade. And that's a powerful word because she is signaling that she does not approve of that description. Some may say, hey, that's okay, that's good, change happens. We need to improve a community. We need better things. We need to improve things. It's inevitable. Those are common perspectives that you'll hear for people who approve and endorse gentrification. She sees that as not a positive thing. And using the word invade will signal that she does not approve of the process. Okay. So that's very key. So invade is to enter for conquest or to plunder or encroach. It has a negative connotation. It is negative in terms of the word invade. And so that's very important for us to know. And so gentrification, and I wanted to break it down as we move forward. So what is gentry? What is the root of the word gentry? So we have gentrification. If we look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it says an upper or ruling class. And this is a typical language that you would see in Europe. And you might have some history classes where we talk about the gentry, and more of it in the past, in the early 1900s and the 1800s and the 1700s, for example. And so it's not by coincidence that she uses the word gentry, but it signals an upper ruling class, people of economic means, people of material means. And then fication is the making or the production. So it's happening. It's in the process. It's not an end product. And so you have put them both together, you have gentrification. Okay. What about today? So the term today has changed in some ways, and in some ways it hasn't changed. For example, the intention and what the word is supposed to signal is still the same. It still has and is still designed to bring attention to something that is not positive. The perspective and the worldview of the people who are concerned about gentrification is that it's not a good thing. Okay? So that intention remains. But the way the definition is now presented and understood has changed a bit. What Glass presented there was a description of what she observed was a paragraph, and it had a lot of components to it. Now, as the decades have gone on, we have something more precise, and even though it's precise, there are clear components to the precision. okay, that were not the same components that glass provided. Okay, so it has changed in some ways, and it has not changed in other ways. Okay. How is it in some ways that it has changed? Before I get into the actual new definition that we have today, I want to point something out. One of the ways that it has changed is that when Glass made the observation, she was focused on individuals or families, right? Moving in. Oh, we got people moving in and they have more money. They're fixing up their houses. Now they maybe have their political elites. Maybe now they're having the attention of the city to fix the streets, etc., etc. But they are families that are moving in, individuals to the homes. Now, in the past couple of decades, since those observations, Neil Smith wrote, whereas the key actors in Glass stories were assumed to be middle and upper middle class immigrants to a neighborhood, so even there they were immigrants moving in of middle class means. The agents of urban regeneration 35 years later are governmental, corporate, and corporate governmental partnerships, and that still remains. So 35 after 64, so now we're in 2022. This emphasis still remains 20 years after this 2002 publication. And so what Smith is telling us is that we can't just focus on those individual families moving into neighborhoods to understand gentrification. He wants us to focus on the city government. He wants us to focus on corporations and businesses, how businesses partner with the government to create partnerships to re-envision whole neighborhoods, to re-envision how to make changes in downtown areas, to re-envision those commercial corridors where you have indoor swap meets, or where you have the barbershops or the beauty salons, where working class people traditionally shop and consume and play, right? This is a key word. You say play, shop, and live. And so that's what he wants us to focus on additional actors, not individual people. Okay. And now we don't really say the gentry, or people don't really talk that way, especially here in the United States. But when we say gentrification, it's middle class. And we get into more articles. Now we get into more debates and more nuances of what does it mean for middle class, let's say Latinx businesses displacing working class businesses. Is that gentrification? Those are good questions to have, and we'll explore those later. So here's a definition. It's something that I put together from different sources, but this is in essence what you will now hear as a common definition. And it's the alteration of a working class area encompassing, and it can include, the area can include typically and housing, so a neighborhood, commercial, so like a downtown area, a commercial strip, or vacant lots, an area that has vacant lots. So when you think about an area, there's different ways to think of areas in a city, and these are typically the components: housing, commercial, or vacant lots. So it's the alteration of this into a middle class area via a combination. How does that happen? Via a combination of displacement and remodeling, or new development and infrastructure improvements. Ultimately, what ends up happening across time is that the social character and the way things are configured also changes. Okay, so what do you mean the way things are configured? Well, now instead of having homes, now you have, let's say, work-live lofts, where you could have businesses in the bottom and you could live in the top. Now where there was just a bunch of homes, now in these work-live lofts, now you have a small pocket park there, etc. So the way things are designed and built that were traditionally done in a certain way, now that even changes now with a lot of newer ways to envision on how to reshape, redo neighborhoods, how to redo downtown areas. Okay. Most of the gentrification literature that you read, or when people talk about it, they'll talk about neighborhoods. But in the last, I would say, 10 years or so, maybe even the last 20 years, you're starting to see more and more publications, more and more news articles, documentaries that focus on downtowns and commercial